80 million views in 48 hours. A 2-minute video that stopped the internet. There were no naked celebrities. There was no scandal. There was no manufactured controversy. There was just a father and a daughter, sitting in the backyard, having a conversation that touched something deep in millions of hearts around the world. To understand why that question was asked, why that response changed so many lives, we need to go back 1 week. We need to enter the life of a 12-year-old girl named Riley Curry, who the entire world knows as that cute little girl from the interviews, but who nobody really knows. You can perceive that being the daughter of someone famous comes with obvious gifts, but it also comes with invisible prices that few can see. It was a Tuesday in March in San Francisco. Riley Curry was sitting in the back of the classroom at Bay Academy, a private school known for educating children of CEOs, artists, and athletes. Not a common school. A school where common simply didn't exist. The mathematics teacher, Diana Thompson, was returning the tests from the previous week. One by one, she called the students. "Excellent work, Marcus." "Very good, Sophie." "Impressive, as always, Emma." And then, "Riley, can we talk after class?" Riley's stomach sank. She already knew. She had gotten a C, maybe C-, in a school where A was the standard and B was disappointment. C was practically failure. When class ended and the other students left, Riley approached Diana's desk with heavy steps, as if she were walking to the gallows. "Riley," Diana began gently, and there was genuine concern in her voice. "I want to talk about more than just the grade. I want to talk about you." Riley looked down, nervous fingers playing with the backpack strap. "You've been trying so hard," Diana continued. "I see it. You stay after class for extra lessons. You do all the homework. But there's something blocking you. And I don't think it's mathematics. I think it's something deeper. How many times in life does a child carry weights they cannot name, but feel in every cell of their body?" Riley just nodded, unable to form words. Because if she opened her mouth, she was afraid that everything would come out. All the fear, all the pressure, all the constant feeling that she would never be enough. "I'm going to call your parents," Diana said softly. "Not because you're in trouble, but because I think you need support that goes beyond equations and formulas." That afternoon, in the car on the way home, Riley was quieter than normal. Aisha, her mother, noticed immediately. "How was school, honey?" Aisha asked, looking through the rearview mirror. "It was okay," Riley answered automatically. The safe answer. The answer that doesn't invite follow-up questions. But Aisha knew her daughters. She knew when okay meant anything but okay. When they arrived home, Riley went straight to her room. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the mirror on the opposite wall. And for the first time in her 12 years of life, she asked a question out loud to her own reflection. Why can't you be good at anything? The question hung in the silent air of the room like toxic smoke. And once asked, it couldn't be undone. It couldn't be ignored. It's impossible not to feel the weight when a child starts to question their own worth. In the following days, Riley started to observe everything with new eyes. She observed how people treated her differently when they discovered she was Steph Curry's daughter. She observed how teachers had unspoken expectations. She observed how classmates assumed she was good at sports simply because of genetics. She observed how each small failure seemed bigger under the invisible microscope of the Curry surname. On Wednesday, she tried dance. Not because she loved dancing, but because she thought that maybe, just maybe, she would find something she was naturally good at. Something that would make others look at her and think, She's special. On Thursday, she watched her younger sister drawing naturally, strokes flowing effortlessly, and felt a pang of something she couldn't name. It wasn't exactly envy. It was more like inadequacy. On Friday, she heard her father on a business call in the office. The door was ajar, and she heard the words that would haunt her. The Curry standard is excellence. It always has been. It always will be. It's what our name means. Riley closed her eyes. Curry standard. Excellence. Always. What if she didn't fit that standard? What if she was the only Curry who was common? That night, after dinner, Riley grabbed her diary, that purple notebook with golden stars that she kept hidden under the mattress, and she wrote, "Everyone expects me to be special, because I'm his daughter. But what if I'm just normal? What if I don't have any real talent? What if I'm just the girl who happened to be born into this family, but doesn't deserve to be in it? Would Dad still love me the same way? Or am I loved because I'm Steph Curry's daughter, and not because I'm Riley?" The tears stained the ink on the last line. But she didn't care, because finally she had put into words the fear that had been haunting her for months. The weekend arrived. Saturday was filled with normal family activities, but Riley was there without really being present. Body in the room, mind elsewhere, processing a question she knew she needed to ask, but was afraid of the answer. Have you ever carried a question so frightening that you preferred to live in uncertainty rather than risk hearing the truth? Sunday arrived. It was gardening day, the weekly ritual that Steph and Riley had maintained since she was little. Every Sunday morning, just the two of them, planting flowers, tending the garden, talking about life. But that Sunday, Riley was quiet, hands in the soil, but mind far away. Steph noticed. Of course he noticed. He knew his daughter. He knew when something was wrong. "Riley," he said gently, pausing with the shovel in hand, "what's going on?" Riley continued digging for a moment. 2, 3, and then she paused, took a deep breath, and said the words she had mentally rehearsed hundreds of times. "Can I ask you a question?" "Always," Steph answered, putting the shovel aside and giving his full attention. Riley looked at her hands dirty with soil, at the flowers waiting to be planted, at anything except her father's eyes, because if she looked at him, she might not be able to ask the question. "Dad," her voice trembled, "would you be proud of me if I wasn't good at anything?" The world stopped. Not metaphorically. For Steph Curry, in that moment, everything literally stopped. The noise of the birds disappeared. The wind stopped blowing. The sun seemed to pause in the sky. And inside the house, through the kitchen window, Aisha, who had heard the question through the open window, felt her heart tighten. And instinctively, she grabbed her phone and started recording. Not for social media, not for the world, but because a mother knows moments that change everything. And this was one of them. Steph put his tools aside completely. He turned to Riley, and what he saw broke his heart into millions of pieces and simultaneously reaffirmed why he had become a father. His daughter, his Riley. That little girl who used to steal microphones at press conferences, that child full of life and confidence, was there, at 12 years old, shrinking into herself, waiting for a verdict on her worth as a human being. What's most striking is when we realize that the deepest wounds come not from direct attacks, but from questions not asked for fear of the answer. "Riley," said Steph, and his voice was loaded with an emotion he rarely let people see. "Come here. Sit with me." They sat on the lawn, side by side, flowers forgotten, gardening abandoned. Because there was something much more important happening. And what Steph said next, what he shared with his daughter in that moment of pure vulnerability, would change not only Riley's life, it would change the lives of millions. But to understand the full impact, we first need to understand how that moment arrived. We need to understand the days of silent pressure, the nights of doubt, the moments of comparison, all the invisible weight that a 12-year-old child had been carrying. Because great things happen when nobody is looking. But sometimes, the most destructive pressures also grow in darkness, invisible, until the day when a child finally finds courage to ask the question that no parent ever wants to hear. And the answer? The answer was about to redefine what it means to be a father, to be a child, and to be human in a world obsessed with performance. While Steph and Riley were in that moment suspended in time, the world continued spinning. But soon, very soon, that private moment would become public. And it would change conversations at family dinners, in therapy rooms, in schools around the planet. But before we get to that answer, we need to understand how Riley arrived at that question. Because questions like that don't arise from nothing. They grow, slowly, silently, like poisonous plants in gardens that seem perfect on the outside. Naturally, this leads us to understand that pressure on children is rarely explicit. It's the sum of 1,000 small moments, of unspoken expectations, of invisible comparisons. 1 week before that conversation in the garden, Riley was having a particularly difficult day at Bay Academy. It was Science Project Presentation Day, and each student had to present their findings about the solar system. Jake, son of a technology CEO, had built an interactive model with programmable LEDs. Sophie, daughter of a film director, had created a professional documentary video. Emma, daughter of a famous architect, had designed a perfect-scale replica. And Riley? Riley had made a poster. A well-done poster, with correct information, decorated with care. But still, just a poster. When she finished her presentation, teacher Diana Thompson smiled warmly. "Excellent work, Riley. Very complete information." But Riley had heard what wasn't said. There was no incredible or impressive. Just excellent work. The kind of praise teachers give when there's nothing particularly special to praise. That day, during lunch, Riley sat alone in a corner of the courtyard. Not because nobody liked her, but because she needed space to process a truth that was beginning to crystallize in her mind. She was common in a school of extraordinaries. How is it possible that being surrounded by excellence can make you feel your own adequacy as inadequacy? But what Riley didn't know was that almost all the other students felt the same way. Jake, with his impressive project, was having panic attacks every night because his father expected him to be CEO before 30. Sophie was in therapy because she couldn't sleep, terrified of disappointing her mother. Emma had developed perfectionism so extreme that she would cry if she received any grade below A+. They were all breaking, just in different ways, under different pressures, but all carrying the same fundamental weight, the feeling that their worth as people was tied to their ability to be exceptional. That afternoon, when Diana called the Curry home, the conversation was deeper than just mathematics. "Mrs. Curry," said Diana carefully, "I want to talk about Riley, not because she's having serious academic problems, but because I'm worried about, how can I say, the emotional weight that she seems to be carrying." Aisha, who was cooking dinner, paused completely. "What do you mean?" "Riley is a great girl," Diana continued. "Kind, hardworking, conscientious. But there's something in her eyes lately. A tension, a pressure. And I've seen this before in other students here. Children of successful people who feel they need to prove something constantly. Aisha closed her eyes. She knew. Of course she knew. She had seen the signs too. But hearing it from someone outside made everything more real. "Thank you for calling," said Aisha softly. We will talk with her." But when Aisha mentioned the call to Steph that night, both were silent for a long moment. Because they knew something that few celebrity parents admit. There's no manual for raising children under spotlights. There's no guide for protecting children from the invisible expectations that come with famous surnames. "I was 12 years old when this hit me," said Steph finally, sitting on the edge of the bed that night. "The feeling that I had to be exceptional just to be enough. Because my father was Del Curry. And I swore that my children would never feel that." Aisha held his hand. "We do the best we can. But she's growing up in a different world. Social media. Constant comparison. Pressure from all sides." "I know," Steph responded. "But maybe it's time to have a real conversation. Not filtered, not softened, real." Have you ever wondered how much of what your children feel is a reflection of what they perceive you value? But that conversation would be postponed, because in the following days, Riley started doing something that worried Aisha even more. She started trying to fit into molds. Monday: "Mom, I want to take dance classes." Tuesday: "Mom, could I try soccer?" Wednesday: "Mom, are there piano classes available?" And each time Aisha saw in her daughter's face not genuine enthusiasm, but desperation. The desperation of someone looking for anything, any talent, any area where she could be special. On Thursday night, Aisha found Riley crying silently in her room. When she asked what was wrong, Riley just shook her head. "Nothing, Mom. I'm just tired." But it wasn't tiredness. It was existential exhaustion. The kind of tiredness that comes from trying to be something you're not, just to prove you're worth the surname you carry. On Friday, Riley heard that conversation from her father. The words about Curry standard and excellence. And something inside her broke a little more. Because she loved her father, admired her father. And the idea of not living up to that standard was devastating. It's impossible not to feel the cruel irony. The love we have for our parents can become the ruler that judges us inadequate. That night, Riley wrote in her diary, not just the question about being loved, but something deeper. "I look at Dad and see greatness. I look at Mom and see talent. I look at my siblings and see natural ease. And then I look at myself and see common. And I know that being common isn't bad. But when your surname is Curry, common seems like failure." The weekend arrived. Saturday was filled with activities, but Riley was operating on autopilot. Present physically, absent emotionally. And then came Sunday, gardening day, the ritual she normally loved. But that day, she knew she couldn't continue carrying that weight alone. Not one more day. Not one more hour. She had to ask the question, even if the answer destroyed her. And when the words finally came out, "Dad, would you be proud of me if I wasn't good at anything?" It was like a dam breaking. Years of self-imposed pressure, months of silent comparison, weeks of desperate attempts to fit into molds that weren't hers. Everything in that single question. And inside the house, Aisha was recording, hands trembling slightly while holding the phone, because she knew that her husband's answer wouldn't just be for Riley. it would be for her, too. For every parent who had ever inadvertently put pressure on a child. For every mother who had ever compared. For every family trying to navigate expectations and love. What's most striking is that the most important moments of life are rarely planned. They just happen, usually when we're most vulnerable and most true. Steph looked at his daughter, at those 12-year-old eyes full of fear and hope, and he knew that the next few minutes would define something fundamental, not just for Riley, but for the type of father he was, the type of man he was. And then he began to speak. And what he said, how he said it, the vulnerability he brought, the truth he shared, would change everything. Sitting on the backyard lawn, surrounded by flowers waiting to be planted, father and daughter were in one of those moments that define relationships, the type of moment you carry for the rest of your life, the type of moment that transforms you. Steph Curry looked at Riley for a long moment before speaking, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different. It wasn't the voice of the confident athlete. It wasn't the voice of the carefully composed public man. It was the voice of a father who was about to be completely, devastatingly honest. "Riley," he began, and there was an emotional texture in his voice that made Riley finally look up. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone. Not even your mother. Not my friends. Nobody." Riley waited, heart beating so loud it seemed audible. "When I was your age, 12 years old," Steph continued, "I asked exactly the same question, not out loud, but in my head, every night before sleeping. Would my father still love me if I wasn't good at basketball? How is it possible that different generations can carry the same fears, just in different contexts? Because my father was Del Curry," he continued, voice becoming softer. "Professional player. And I felt that I had to be exceptional just to be sufficient. That if I was just average, or worse, if I didn't like basketball, I would be a disappointment." Riley was completely still now, processing each word. "And you know what that self-imposed pressure did to me?" Steph asked, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "It almost broke me. I had nights where I couldn't sleep, days where I had stomach pain before games, not because I didn't like playing, but because I felt my worth as a person was tied to my performance." He paused, breathing deeply to recompose himself. "And it took years, Riley. Years of therapy. Years of conversations with your grandmother. Years of working on my head to realize a fundamental truth." "What truth?" Riley asked softly, her own voice breaking. Steph held her face with both hands, looking directly into her eyes. "The truth that I didn't need to be exceptional to be loved. That my worth as a person had nothing to do with what I could do with a basketball. That I was loved not despite my failures, but including them." Tears ran freely down his face now. "So, I'm going to answer your question," he said, voice firm despite the emotion. "But first, I need you to understand something about being good at something. You can perceive that we're about to hear a truth that society works hard to hide from us. Riley, you're already good at something. In fact, you're good at many things," said Steph. "You're good at being kind, at asking honest questions, at caring about others, at being curious, at having courage to be vulnerable, at being my daughter, at being you." He paused, letting the words breathe. "But the world doesn't value these things the same way it values trophies or grades or measurable talents. And that's the world's problem, not yours." Riley was crying now, years of pressure beginning to release. But to answer directly, without beating around the bush, the question you asked, Steph continued, his voice gaining strength. You asked me if I would be proud of you if you weren't good at anything. He took a deep breath. And my answer is no. I wouldn't be proud. Riley froze. The world seemed to stop. I would be more proud, Steph completed, voice now full of absolute conviction. I would be more proud. You know why? It's impossible not to feel the power of an answer that completely subverts expectations. Because it would mean you're living free, he explained, words coming faster now, as if they had been waiting years to be said. Free from pressure to be exceptional. Free from comparison. Free from feeling you need to prove something to deserve love. And that freedom? That freedom is the most difficult and most courageous thing anyone can achieve. He wiped the tears from her face with his thumbs. Riley, I spent my entire life being exceptional at one thing. And yes, it brought success. It brought recognition. But you know what it didn't automatically bring? Peace. Contentment. The feeling that I was enough just being me. So when you ask me if I would be proud of you if you weren't good at anything, he continued, you're asking the wrong question. The right question is, are you free to be yourself? Do you wake up every day feeling you can be who you are, without masks, without performance? Because if the answer is yes, then you've already achieved something most people spend their entire lives seeking. What's most striking is when we realize that what the world values and what really matters are rarely the same thing. But Dad, Riley finally found her voice, people expect me to be special because I'm your daughter. What if I just want to be normal? Then be normal, Steph answered without hesitation. Be gloriously, wonderfully normal. Because normal isn't failure, Riley. It's freedom. He sat more comfortably on the lawn, pulling Riley to sit closer. Let me tell you something about the Curry standard you heard, he said, referencing the conversation Riley had overheard. When I talk about standard of excellence in business context, I'm talking about integrity, about doing things the right way, about treating people well. I'm not talking about being exceptional in all aspects of life. And you know what my biggest fear as a father is? He asked, voice breaking. Again. It's not that you won't be successful. It's that you'll grow up feeling you need to be extraordinary to be loved. That you'll spend life performing instead of living. That you'll reach 40, 50 years old and realize you spent your whole life trying to be someone you thought you should be, instead of discovering who you really are. He held her hands firmly. Riley, if tomorrow you decide you want to be a gardener, or work in a coffee shop, or write poetry that nobody reads, or simply live a quiet life away from spotlights, I'll be in the front row applauding. Because my job as a father isn't to make you exceptional in the world's eyes. It's to help you be free. And being free means having permission to be exactly who you are, without apologies, without performance. How many times in life do we need to hear that we're loved not for what we do, but simply for existing? So yes, Steph concluded, tears and smile mixed on his face. I would be proud. I would be more proud than any trophy has ever made me feel. Because you would have achieved something that took me decades to learn. That you don't need to be exceptional to be valuable. You're already valuable, simply for being you. Riley threw herself into her father's arms, and both cried. Not tears of sadness, but of release. Of years of pressure being dissolved. of love being redefined not as conditional based on performance, but as unconditional based on existence. And inside the house, Aisha was still recording, tears running down her own face, because she also needed to hear that. She also carried fears of not measuring up. And in that moment, she realized something. The gift that Steph was giving Riley wasn't just hers. It was for all of them. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes. Steph shared his own insecurities, his own moments of feeling inadequate, his own struggles with identity when injuries threatened to take away the only thing he thought defined him. And Riley, for the first time, shared her own struggles. The pressure at school, the constant comparison, the feeling that she would never be enough. And father and daughter cried together, laughed together, and began to heal together. Because great things happen when nobody is looking. But sometimes, letting some of these great things be seen can transform not just two people, but millions. And that night, when Aisha gathered Steph and Riley in the living room and showed them the video she had recorded, she asked carefully, "Do you think we can share this? It doesn't have to be. It's your decision." Steph looked at Riley. "It's your story too, sweetheart. What do you think?" Riley watched the video again. She saw her vulnerability. She saw her father's tears. And then, after thinking carefully, she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "Because if I feel this way, maybe other children feel this way too. And maybe this will help." And so they agreed. Not for attention, but because they knew that somewhere, some other child was asking the same question. Some other parent was carrying the same fears. And maybe, just maybe, that conversation could free more than just Riley Curry. Maybe it could free all of us. Aisha posted the video at 9 o'clock at night on Sunday with a simple caption, "Conversations that Matter." 2 minutes of the complete 40-minute video, edited carefully to protect the most private moments, but maintaining the essence, Riley's question, and Steph's devastatingly honest answer. At 9:15, it had 1,000 views. At 9:30, 10,000. At 10 o'clock at night, 100,000. And then something extraordinary happened. The algorithm noticed. People started to share. Not just basketball fans. Fathers, mothers, children, therapists, teachers. Anyone who had ever questioned their own worth or seen someone question theirs. At midnight, 5 million views. Naturally, this leads us to understand that some truths are universal, waiting only for someone brave enough to say them out loud. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the comments. The thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of comments that appeared faster than anyone could read. A 45-year-old father in Ohio. "I stopped everything I was doing. I called my daughter, who I haven't spoken to in 2 years, because I pushed her too hard in college. I left a crying message apologizing. She called me back. We're talking now. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Riley." A 16-year-old teenager. "I was searching how to give up when I saw this video, because I feel I'll never be good enough. But hearing that even Riley Curry feels this, and hearing her father's answer, saved me from something very dark tonight." A mother. "I showed this to my 10-year-old son, who has ADHD and feels dumb because he learns differently. He cried and said, 'So I can just be me.' And I cried even more because I realized I was unconsciously putting pressure. Today changed everything." A teacher. "I'm going to show this to every class I teach because I have students who are breaking under pressure to be exceptional. and they need to hear this. How is it possible that two people having an honest conversation can give permission for millions to do the same? On Monday morning, the video had 20 million views. It was trending #1 globally. But more importantly, it was changing conversations. In Denver, a family sat down for breakfast and for the first time in years really talked. Not about grades or achievements, but about feelings, fears, pressures. In Atlanta, a father called work, saying he would arrive late because he needed to have a conversation with his daughter. A real conversation he had postponed for too long. In Seattle, an adolescent therapist started her session showing the video, and for the first time, her patients began to open up about pressures they carried in silence. And in Los Angeles, LeBron James, himself a father of 3, shared the video with a message. Every parent needs to see this. I need to see this. We all need to be reminded of what really matters. Love, not performance. The hashtag was born organically. Love, not performance. And in 48 hours, it had 10 million posts. Not from celebrities seeking attention, but from ordinary people sharing their own stories, their own struggles, their own never-asked questions. Tuesday, 40 million views. Wednesday, 60 million. Thursday, 80 million. But Steph and Riley weren't paying attention to the numbers. They were living what they had discussed. Riley returned to school on Monday different, not cured of all insecurities. That would take time. But free. Free to be honest. When Diana Thompson asked how she was, for the first time, Riley didn't say, okay. She said the truth. I'm struggling. But I'm learning it's okay to struggle. It's impossible not to feel how authentic honesty can be simultaneously, frightening and liberating. On Wednesday, Riley did something brave. During lunch, when everyone was sharing about talents and achievements, she raised her hand. "Can I share something?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. "Of course, Riley," said the teacher. "I'm not exceptional at anything," Riley said, and the room went quiet. "And I was so afraid to admit this, but my father taught me that not being exceptional isn't failure. It's just being human. And I wanted you to know that if anyone else here feels this way, you're not alone." For 3 seconds, absolute silence. And then something unexpected. Jake, the boy with the impressive science project, raised his hand. "I feel this way every day," he said, voice breaking. "Panic attacks every night. Because I'm afraid of not being good enough." And then Sophie raised her hand, and Emma. And suddenly, half the class was sharing. Teachers were crying. Because, for the first time, these children, growing up under impossible pressure, were being honest. And all because Riley had the courage to tell the truth. What's most striking is how one person's vulnerability can create permission for everyone to be vulnerable. Friday, 1 week after the video, Bay Academy held a special assembly. Not about achievements or awards, about mental health, about pressure, about being human. Diana Thompson organized, but it was the students who led, sharing stories, supporting each other. And for the first time, that school of extraordinaries began to celebrate ordinary, to normalize struggle, to honor humanity. 2 weeks after the video, Steph and Riley were invited to the Today Show, not as celebrities, but as father and daughter who had touched something deep. The anchor, visibly emotional, asked, "Riley, how are you now?" Riley, more confident than 2 weeks ago, answered, "I'm still not exceptional at mathematics. I still haven't discovered my special talent. But I learned that it's okay, because being a good daughter, good friend, good person, these things count, and these I can do. And Steph, the anchor continued, what do you want other parents to take from this conversation? Steph paused, choosing words carefully. I want parents to understand that when we tell our children we love them unconditionally, we need to really mean it. Not just when they get good grades, not just when they win trophies, not just when they're exceptional, but especially when they're just human, when they struggle, when they fail, when they're mediocre. Because it's in these moments that unconditional love really matters. He looked at Riley beside him. And for children who are watching, especially children of successful or famous parents, you don't have to carry the weight of the surname. You don't have to be exceptional to be valuable. You're already valuable, simply for existing. 3 months after the video, Riley wrote an open letter. Aisha helped edit, but the words were all Riley's. To all the children who feel they need to be special, my name is Riley Curry, and for a long time, I felt my surname was a weight I had to carry by being exceptional at something. Anything. But the truth is, I'm common. Mathematics is hard. I don't have natural talent in sports. I'm not a prodigy in art or music. I'm just Riley. And it took an honest conversation with my father to realize this is more than enough. So if you're reading this and feeling you need to be special to be loved, you don't need to. You're already enough. You always have been. And anyone who truly loves you knows this. With love, Riley. The letter was read by 15 million people, and the comments were thousands of other Rileys, children of famous people, children of successful people, and children of ordinary people, all sharing that they felt seen, that they felt less alone. 6 months later, schools around the country began implementing Riley conversations, dedicated periods where students could talk honestly about pressure, expectations, and humanity without judgment. Adolescent mental health organizations reported a 30% increase in young people seeking help. Not because problems increased, but because stigma decreased. And it all started with a question. A question no parent wants to hear, but that every child needs to be able to ask. 1 year after that Sunday in the garden, Steph and Riley were planting flowers again. Weekly ritual they had maintained, but now it was different. Lighter. Freer. "Dad," said Riley as they dug, "thank you." "For what?" asked Steph. "For letting me be just Riley," she answered, smiling. "Without pressure to be extraordinary, just free to discover who I am." Steph hugged his daughter, tears in his eyes again. "You know what's funny?" he said. "I spent my entire life being exceptional at one thing. I won trophies, awards, recognition. But my greatest achievement? It's not any of that. It's this moment. Knowing you're free. Knowing you know you're loved not for what you do, but for who you are." How many times in life do we realize our greatest successes aren't public, but deeply private? And there, in that garden, father and daughter continued planting flowers, not under pressure to create a perfect garden, just enjoying the process, being present, being free. Because great things happen when nobody is looking. But the greatest thing you can do is ensure that the people you love know they're loved, especially when they're not doing anything great. And in a world that constantly demands performance, exceptionality, greatness, the most revolutionary act is to tell someone, you don't need to be special. You're already enough, exactly as you are. That's the lesson Riley learned. That's the lesson Steph taught. And that's the lesson 80 million people carried in their hearts. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many trophies you win. It matters how many people you free to be themselves. And that's real greatness.